Well, first of all, Zoe, thank you so much for being here as a guest of Strofo the podcast. I'm super excited for this conversation. I'm excited to know more about what the European Commission is working on regarding food waste and losses. And before starting going deep into the conversation, I wanted to remind everyone that World Discuss Today is about to come, which is our biggest campaign to face food waste and also to invite people to take action to raise awareness on a local level about food waste. And so, if anyone is interested in joining, I will add the link in the podcast description to join our campaign. And today I am with Zoe Caramitsou-Tzira from the DG Health and Food Safety from the European Commission. And today we're going to discuss about food waste. Maybe before starting, may I ask you, Zoe, to tell us a bit more about your role in the DG Health and Food Safety?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. As you mentioned, I'm Zoe Caramitsou-Tzira. I work in DG Santé, or what we call DG Santé, the Director General for Health and Food Safety, and I'm a policy officer there. Our role as DG Santé is to help ensure that food in the European Union is safe, healthy and sustainable. And in my work specifically, I work on food waste prevention. So this means helping develop EU policies and initiatives that encourage countries or member states, businesses and citizens to waste less food. And so food waste might sound like a small kind of everyday issue, but it's actually has huge environmental, economic, and social consequences. So we're trying to work to tackle this. So part of my work is essentially to work with EU member states, researchers, food businesses, and NGOs to design policies, share good practices, but also practical tools that can help reduce food waste along the food supply chain, um, from farms to factories to supermarkets, and then all the way into our homes.
Hmm. And have you always been interested in food waste yourself personally?
Well, yes. So, I mean, I've worked in food and agriculture policy for quite a while now, and what I really enjoy about food waste is really it's a really easy topic to understand and a topic that is also highly relatable for every single person. And I think it's, yeah, a topic whose impact reaches beyond the individual. So it's got huge environmental consequences, there's huge social ones, and I can give some data on that also maybe a bit later. But it's a highly relevant and important topic that also the individual can have an impact on, which I think is not the case for some things at least. So I do enjoy the topic, yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And from a European perspective, how do you see the issue of food waste?
Yeah, so it's a really big challenge in Europe, but also around the world, of course, but we'll focus on Europe. Or the EU. Every year, the EU generates around 58 to 59 million tons of food waste. And just to give it a bit of an image, that's about 132 kilograms per person in the entire European Union. And what surprises many people is that more than half of this actually happens in households, so in our homes. And as you saw, or as you might remember earlier, I listed that, it has a social impact, an environmental impact, and an economic impact. So this is the economic impact. The environmental one is, producing food requires land, water, energy, labor, and all of that is lost as soon as food is thrown away. And in the EU, food waste amounts to about 16% of greenhouse gas emissions from the food chain. And importantly, it costs our economy approximately 132 billion euros a year. So it has a huge economic impact. But it also, has a really important social dimension. And this is something I think a lot of people can recognize and can relate to. While we waste so much food, so many people can't afford a healthy meal. And this is, an ethical issue. And I think over 42 million people can't afford a proper meal every 2 days. This shouldn't be happening, especially when we're wasting so much food. So, it's not just reducing food waste is not just about efficiency. It's also about fairness and making a better use of the food that we produce. So that's why at EU level or at the European Union, they really see food reduction as a key part of building a more sustainable food system more widely, but also protecting the environment and really supporting also food security for our futures.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. Also, what you said at the beginning that most of the food is wasted at home, so from a household level. And I guess that it's also quite difficult for the European Union to tackle that because, I mean, if you make like a policy, let's say for companies or so on, that they have to reduce food waste, I guess that it's easier in a way because they have to stick to the rule. But when it comes to households, first of all, I feel that it's really difficult to measure also how much food people waste. So I guess there's has been like some research, no, or like some they made like some average between like different households. I also wonder, like, I don't know if you know like where this data come from? Like how did they do this research to figure out that most of the food was wasted there? And then the other question is then how can we help people in their homes to reduce food waste?
Yeah, yeah, these are all really good questions, and they're good points. So essentially, this information comes from measurements that are done at member state level. So essentially, we've been working at the EU on food waste for quite a long time. EU member states have been required to measure and report their food waste levels, and they do this in various ways. But for example, for households, they do waste compositional analysis, for example. So they analyze waste at a municipal level that comes from households. And then they also, of course, do surveys and things like this, but a lot of it is waste compositional analysis. And there's also set methodologies for food waste measurement that the EU has developed that then national or local authorities can use to measure their food waste. And so member states have had to measure their food waste and report it to the EU since 2020. And this has really helped us kind of understand where the issues lie and what we should focus on. So unfortunately, the data that we've received and are still receiving from member states has shown that the challenge is still big and there hasn't been a reduction um, in recent years. And so that's why now at EU level, we've responded to this and we're trying to deal with this in a few ways. So first, so there was a regulation or a directive called the Waste Framework Directive, which was a directive that looks at waste in a wide perspective, and food was one of them. There was a targeted revision of the Waste Framework Directive that happened last year. And by targeted revision, I mean the entire directive was not revised, just two pillars, one of them food and one of them textiles. And in the food one, we have now put forward mandatory, so legally binding food waste reduction targets that member states need to reach by 2030. This is 30% per person, so per capita, at retail and consumption levels. So this means in shops, households, restaurants, food services more widely, which includes like hotels and things like this, and 10% in processing and manufacturing. So these targets are really important because they kind of give a clear goal for countries. But As you might know, I'll explain it a bit for the listeners, but there's a difference between a regulation and a directive. So
I was gonna ask you
yeah,
about it as well.
so
Yeah.
a regulation is in simple terms, the regulation itself dictates what you should do and how you should do it, whereas a directive dictates what you should do, but not how you should do it. So member states are kind of allowed to find their own ways to reach these targets depending on their national circumstances, and they need to come up with national plans on how they're going to reach these targets. Um, so for, there can be many ways they can do this. And you mentioned households specifically. Of course, a lot of this involves education on various levels. So it can be education on better understanding of labeling, so of best before dates, use by dates, and the difference between them, which is usually quite widely misunderstood. It can be education on use of leftovers and just awareness of food waste more widely. I also know that there's a lot of educational programs being rolled out in schools. There's changes to serving styles in restaurants, the use of the like a mandatory use of takeaways. There's quite a few things that can be done. Of course, like you said, it is difficult because it has to do with human behavior, and human behavior is not easy, or it's not that simple to change it. But of course, there's a lot of behavioral studies on nudging and the efficacy of that. So those are things that are being looked into. And yeah, I mean, you know, uh, impact for consumers and small businesses is going to be always more gradual than, for example, for the supply chains or things like that. But I think it's something that we have to wait and see on how this is rolled out by each country. And of course, the EU is always there, or the Commission is always there to help. And I can explain also a bit later what we do um, beyond regulation to help um, when the kind of member states and organizations with how to implement actions to reduce food waste.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting, and also, I mean, it feels quite challenging, right? Also, like to make sure that each member state implements the directive like in their own way and make sure that it reaches the goal that you said. You said that it's a 30% reduction, right?
Yes,
The goal.
at consumer and food services level, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
households
And
and
how do you know how much time do member states have
till
to reach this
2030.
goal? 2030.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
And I guess they have to report to the EU each, I don't know, each year
yes,
or yeah.
exactly. And they've been doing that since 2020. So they just
Okay.
need to continue reporting. And
Hmm.
hopefully, now that there are mandatory targets, we'll be seeing more of a reduction from year to year.
Yeah.
And, and of course, if that's not the case, there'll have to be action on that. And then there's also a clause in the regulation to see whether these targets need to be amended, whether that is that they can't be reached or we can be more ambitious, and whether they should be
Hmm.
extended past 2030. It's also going to be a part of the directive also touches on that we're going to have to do a bit of an assessment and a review on whether we want to or can keep going with this a bit further.
Let's hope the best. And also you mentioned then there is other tools that you are developing for food waste reduction. Can you tell us a bit more about those tools?
Yes. So in addition to legislation, we have several tools and mediums through which we engage with member states and stakeholders to help and promote food waste reduction. So we have one big platform called the EU Platform on Food Loss and Food Waste, which was established in 2016. So we've been working on this for a while. And it brings together member states, businesses, researchers, NGOs to share solutions and coordinate kind of on efforts across Europe. So you can find information on the platform actually very easily on our website. And so for the listeners, I mean, if they're interested, as well as recordings of our plenary meetings and access to all the presentations of all the plenary meetings and all the subgroup meetings and also the agendas. So you can someone can get a really good idea on what kind of topics we discuss. And we also have different subgroups that focus on specific topics. So one, for example, is on measurement. That one tends to be quite technical. But then we have one just on consumer food waste, which is quite interesting. And we also have one on food donation and one on action and implementation, which is essentially, just to simplify it, on direct actions to reduce consumer food waste. So it could be innovations, it could be new tools. So yeah, that's essentially the structure of it. And the presentations also, will include updates from member states. So those are always quite interesting to see what different member states are doing and where they are on their journey. And also presentations from innovators, new technologies that are coming on the market or being developed, and also kind of other best practices. We also like to speak a lot to local levels, so municipalities, cities, because they tend to really be at the forefront of reducing food waste, especially in household level. They're the ones closer to the citizens than someone in the Ministry of Environment at the government level. So we do like to also engage a lot with cities and local governments.
And how, sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt you, but in this case, how do you do? Like, do you go to visit also some municipalities and give, for example, a workshop there, or do you invite them to the meetings of the platform?
Yeah, so we invite them to the meetings of the platform, and we've had even some platform meetings almost exclusively dedicated to the work at city level. So we have different themes, different topics, and we, will also do a lot of sharing of information among them. A lot of the time, what we've seen that actors at local level need or are lacking is also information sharing with other municipalities or other countries on what works, what doesn't work, and we kind of try and give them a platform to do so through our EU platform. So that's always quite helpful, and we've seen good results. It also is a space for all of these actors to network between each other, share
Yeah.
information, get to know each other, and we have multiple meetings a year. We try and have as many as possible in person because we think that that's really important. So that's usually quite good. So we are quite active with that. And through the platform also we develop our own materials based on what our members want. So we had some recommendations that we developed in 2019. We had a report. We also developed reports, and these can all also be found on our website. Um, then we have the Food Loss and Waste Prevention Hub. To cut a long story
Mhm.
short, it's essentially a knowledge center, an online knowledge center that collects new research, best practices, and practical examples from across Europe. This is so that policymakers, schools, companies, and citizens can learn and really replicate some of the best practices and also know what kind of new research there is out there and studies. It also has a really good outline, the hub, of what is being done and the kind of state of play in each member state. So that's also quite interesting for people to have a look. You can click on your country and see the reporting of the food waste data for the past, I think, 3-4 years. So you can see where your country stands in terms of progress or regression, or if nothing's really changed. And it also lists all of the regulation in each country that already exists on food waste. So that's usually quite interesting. Then,
Yeah, so to answer to the first
mhm.
question of how to find the data, then you look at this hub and you find the answer
Yes, exactly.
divided by all the
So you
countries.
can, yeah, exactly. So you can find it there. And then, of course, the source of this data is also, so kind of the database where this data lives is
Yeah.
at Eurostat. So the statistical office of the European Commission. So you can find also all the data there, and you can see it since the beginning of when your specific country started reporting the data. So everything's available online and everything is public. Um, we've also developed toolkits. So, for example, we have the European Consumer Food Waste Forum toolkit. So this is to help. So it's not as relevant potentially to citizens because it's more to help policymakers, local authorities, schools, organizations on how to reduce consumer food waste. It has video tutorials. It's very interesting to have a look at. It has also an action planner, so where depending on your context, you can put a bunch of parameters and it can tell you what the most effective actions would be. It also has a calculator, which you would say, okay, if I do this and I do that, how much would I realistically reduce food waste for? And how much economic savings would I gain from this? So it's also to kind of incentivize businesses or organizations to do this and see directly what kind of impact this would have with some simple actions. And then, of course, resources like leaflets, some educational materials and things like that. And then research reports, of course. So it's all kind of also focused in one place. In addition to this, and then I'll wrap it up, we support at the European Commission innovation and research. So we have a lot of grants and funding for small, companies or organizations that are looking to reduce food waste. In the past, we mainly had, at least I think for the last two calls, we mainly had it focused on consumer food waste actually, since it's the hot spot for food waste. So this is through Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, and the Single Market Program, what we call the SNP. And through these programs, we support research and innovation to develop new solutions to help reduce food waste across the food system. And these kind of look at many different approaches from digital tools, improving food management and logistics, smart packaging that extends shelf life, behavioral insights and research that help people make better decisions when it comes to food in restaurants and at home. And we really think innovation plays a key role. So we really try and support that a lot. Um, and then, of course, you probably know about this, but the International Day on Food Loss and Food Waste. What is it called? The International Day Against Food Loss and Food Waste is the full name, which was kind of created by the UN. We always celebrate it on the 29th of September. We always do a lot of events and activities around that. And last 2 years ago, we created a cookbook, which was very good on how to use food waste. So that's also to kind of try and reach the consumer. Um, and that can also be found on our website, by the way. And most countries also do different activities on that day. And I think the FAO has a toolkit for anyone who can also they can start their kind of grassroots campaign around the 29th of September. So I also recommend people have a look, and you can always do something in your community to raise some awareness. So we try and do our best.
Definitely. No, you're doing a lot,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, we are trying.
Yeah, now we're trying to condense everything in this podcast, but I mean, you could stay here to talk for hours about like all the different initiatives, and it's really complete, no? Like 360 degrees approach, so very interesting. And definitely we'll add the link to the platform on food waste and losses. We will add the link to the toolkit.
Yeah, of course.
And I have also one final question, also like a bit more personal question. regarding the toolkit, or if you found any tip or trick to save foods that you really liked, for example, and you also applied in your kitchen.
Yeah,
Yeah, just to that.
of course,
Mhm.
there's so many. And I think I'm going to speak on a person for the individual. The biggest thing I would say is really to a certain degree forward planning. So really knowing what you have in your home and what you have in your kitchen before you go shopping, making shopping lists. This is all very important. And trying to accommodate your eating to what you already have and what you can make out of what you already have. This is all very important. But this is more day-to-day habits that you can build. So it's more about changing your how you do things on a day-to-day. Then more practical, direct things, or I think one very important one is, and it's simple and it sounds silly, but better understanding how your fridge works is very important. Your fridge has different temperatures throughout the fridge, and knowing where everything goes is very important, and that can help extend shelf life of your food by quite a bit. Another thing is
You
understanding,
you mean to, sorry, you mean like to store it in
yeah,
different positions in the fridge?
exactly.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. So this is something you can find information on online where things go, but it does make a big difference. I didn't think it did, and then I tried it, and it really does. Um, Another thing which is very important is, and that I think a lot of people don't know or don't understand, is the difference between the type of what we call expiration labels or expiry labels. Best before is not the same as use by. Use by has to do with safety. So a use by label would be on something like fish or meat, where really there is a health risk in consuming this food after the the expiry date. For best before, it's about quality rather than safety, so you can still eat it. And I think people shouldn't be so strict with it. They should use your senses, taste it, smell it, look at it, see if things are still good to eat. Understanding the difference between those two labels is really important, and I think can save a lot of food from being thrown away needlessly. Um, and then, of course, freezing is your friend. If you think you're not going to use something, freeze it. Don't let it go bad. It's always very easy to do. And of course, being creative. I think, you have something in your fridge that you think is going to go bad, find a new recipe, do something interesting with it, do something new. Don't be afraid to try new things. Um, and then outside of the home, I would say certainly always taking food out. So what I mean is leftovers from the restaurant, for example, not letting that go to waste and actually eating it at home. I think that's really important. And for those who buffets are a huge food waster. It's a huge source of food waste. So I would recommend not getting charmed by buffets and trying to either, you can take a strong stance about it if you want, but if you do go to a buffet, not not eat too much, or not yeah, not be charmed by the abundance of food. But there's many tips and tricks, and I could talk about it for ages. But it's small things, but that really make a big difference. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, it's also really interesting, the one of buffet. I actually never really thought about it, but it's a lot of hotels, and I mean it's like kind of the standard, no? That like for breakfast you have like a buffet. So I really I get it, no? That there is a lot of waste. Maybe we should do another podcast on buffets,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah,
really interesting topic.
yeah. There's
Hmm.
also there's quite a lot of studies also on buffets and food waste.
Yeah.
And because also there are difficulties in donating food from buffets because of food safety. So in the end, there's not a lot that can be done sometimes with this food. Also, so
Yeah.
it is a bit of a shame. But one other big thing that I would like to emphasize is also um, a big part of what we do is looking at food donation on that note. So working with food banks, and most food banks always need volunteers. So if you want to be more involved in the topic, working in food banks, there's always space for you, I'm sure, to go and help. And
Mm,
those are really big forefronts, you know, of the fight against food waste. Also, food can be repurposed in many ways. We have what we call a food hierarchy, food use hierarchy. So, of course, first comes prevention, and then comes reuse for human consumption. So that's donation, and then all the other ones. So use of food for animal feed or biofuels. But we always try and prioritize the highest on the chain. We want food to go to humans. So food banks are really the big front line for this fight, also in, you know, inequality
yeah.
and poverty, and they're really unsung heroes that deserve help and attention. So
Yeah, I think this is a great call to action to finish this interview, really to invite people to get in touch with the local food banks and to try to volunteer if that is possible. It's really, really important. And thank you so much, Zoe, for all this information. Thank you so much for the important work that you are doing. It's
thank you.
really, really great that there is
Thank you.
people in the European Union working on this. And yeah, thank you so much for your time and for being our guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.